What up, AP Euro family? So, today we're going to be talking about perhaps my most favorite person in all of history, Napoleon Bonaparte. All right, so we've already talked about his rise to power during the 18th of Brumaire, or what some people call his coup of November 9th, 1799. But who exactly is Napoleon Bonaparte? Well, he comes from a really weird background, which is partially what makes him so prolific as a leader. So he's not really French, but he's not Italian. He's from Corsica. And his family are landed. They own land, but they're kind of commoner stock. They're not special in the gentry of Corsica. So he's got a really humble beginning. But Napoleon is super bright. As a youngster, excels at mathematics and science, and he earns his entry into the prestigious military academy in France. He doesn't do tremendously well at first. He seems to be a bit of an outsider. He's a little bit broody and moody. But as time goes on, he starts to really excel with the mathematics and new ways of utilizing military technology, specifically artillery, right? He's really going to reinvent the way to employ artillery on a battlefield. So it's not just a siege weapon, it's an actual offensive weapon on the battlefield. And so he rises to some prominence that way. So he gets some notice. Now, in his career, he was a Jacobin, right? He was sympathetic towards the Committee of Public Safety, to the Mountain. He was politically connected to those revolutionary ideas, but he never entered politics at that point. He wasn't involved in the killings during the terror or anything like that. He was too busy defending the French frontier, and really his major focus during his campaigns was fighting in northern Italy to keep the Austrians out of southern France. And in 1793, he earns probably his most celebrated early career victory. He breaks the siege of Toulon in southern France. And again, using artillery. The British had taken Toulon, which really meant that the French were surrounded. And so he had this idea, what if we could sneak artillery batteries up on the hills surrounding the city? We could rain the artillery down onto the ships, the docks in the city below. And it worked. And so he earned promotion and a lot of national notoriety for breaking the siege and driving the British out of France. And we already mentioned before his famous whiff of grape shot, where he saved the Directory from a counter-insurrection, a royalist uprising. And so Napoleon, he is involved in the revolution, right? Throughout, we can kind of see him peek in, but not really as a radical politician, as a genuine military hero. Now, as things are switching or transitioning into the time of the Directory, Napoleon is one of France's top officers by this point, and he is sent to Egypt in the famous Egyptian campaign. And the goal is to cut off the supply lines, the lines of communication between England and India, right? They want to cut England off from its favorite colony, India, which was the jewel of their empire. And so in 1798, Napoleon fights several key battles. There's the Battle of the Pyramids. There's also the Battle of the Nile. Now, Napoleon really cleaned up in Egypt. He was quite successful in his battles, except for the Battle of the Nile. It's kind of when time runs out for him. So they make a horrible error. They anchor a bunch of ships close to the Nile. Tide draws out. The ships then are sitting in very shallow water, and they can't maneuver. And the British then ambush. They sail in very quickly, and they start gunning at the French ships laying in moor, and they can't get out in time. And so it's a horrible, crushing defeat for the French. Many troops are actually going to be stranded in Egypt for years. They're not going to be able to bring back the main body of their army. But it's also at this exact same time in history, right, that we know in 1799, Napoleon comes back to Paris, and he has his coup, right? He knocks over the Directory. So it's kind of interesting. He actually comes back as a liar, right? He lies to the French people and says, no, we got it. Egypt's going fine. I had to come here to help out. it wasn't really true, right? Egypt wasn't going tremendously well. It had, and then it wasn't, and it wasn't anymore. And so, what again? The great propaganda of this guy, like, oh yeah, don't worry, I'm here because it's not good in France. I'm not here because I can't get my army home. Really shisty. Now, this isn't the only time that a naval battle is going to spell disaster for Napoleon and his empire, but we'll get to the other one in just a moment. Okay, the other reason why the Egypt campaign is famous is Napoleon brought with him translators, scientists, archaeologists, anthropologists. I mean, this was like a true scientific adventure into Egypt. They weren't there just to stop the British, they were also there to better understand Egypt, right? And so we have famous things like him fighting at the Battle of the Pyramids, where he talks about how 40 centuries of history were watching upon him, right? Here's this painting of him by the Sphinx. They also recover the famous Rosetta Stone on this journey, and not including all the other great artifacts, trinkets, Egyptology, and archaeological resources that they find. But the Rosetta Stone is a special one because up until this point, what ancient Egyptians believed and said, even their history as far as who the pharaohs were and what life was like in Egypt, was largely mystery. It was kind of like superstition and fantasy. The Rosetta Stone allowed spoken Egyptian and Greek, two languages that were understood and translated, to then be used to decipher or break hieroglyphics. And then after that point, our understanding of Egypt improved significantly. All right, so at the start of the 19th century, here's what it looks like. France has actually enlarged itself. So even though the revolution had seemed so terrifying or frightening at first, they have now spilled over into the Low Countries. Belgium, the Netherlands, right? Those have been liberated by France. And so the revolution is actually expanding, right? Because of Napoleon's great work in southern France, they've reclaimed their own territories and then spilled over into northern Italy. The revolution has grown. And this is a big part of Napoleon's rule and why he's such an important figure in European history. Is wherever French boots go, so too does the French Revolution, right? He brings the ideologies of the Enlightenment, of the French Revolution, to the rest of Europe. And that is really important, right? In a place like the Netherlands that had wanted independence, they had wanted a reshuffling of social hierarchy for so many years, these ideas will find a home. And we'll talk about this. Those ideas will find a home in the Holy Roman Empire. They will find a home in what used to be Poland, which is now recently taken off the map of Europe, right? And so he's going to become a projector of the French Revolution ideology. Okay, so not long after his coup, he and his two other political allies, Abisai being one of them, will name themselves the consuls of France. So there'll be three of them. However, that progression will change, and so he eventually proclaims himself the first consul, the first among equals, right? He supersedes the other ones. He then starts appointing senators instead of going through the electoral process. And then this is really where it starts to tip out of a democratic system, really. By 1802, he has named himself consul for life, which should sound familiar. That's a very Julius Caesar thing to do, and that's 2.5 years after his coup on the government, where he already had these visions of Julius Caesar, and he's continuing to play that out. And then again, by 1804, he will crown himself, right? He'll have himself named Emperor of the French Empire, and he will take this as his signa. And again, it looks completely like a Roman imperial signa right off the battlefields of Rome. So there you go. All right, let's look at a couple reforms, and then we will stop. Right, so we've set up Napoleon. Now let's look at why he's special. So in his early career, he is a fantastic politician. I would argue probably one of the most celebrated politicians in European history, certainly in French history. He deserves to be respected as a political reformer. He really was quite ahead of his time, quite progressive in his reforms. So we're going to do a couple of things that make Napoleon, I say, a quite legendary politician. All right, so first in 1800, so he is at this point consul. He creates the Bank of France. Now, other nations like England had already had a national bank. France did not. And so Napoleon decides that in order to stimulate the economy, and really this is a total nod to the middle class of France, right? This is for the middle class, the entrepreneurial class of France. You want a place where you can get a loan. You want a place where your money is insured by the government. You want to know that there is a guaranteed pinning of insurance rates to inflation. The Bank of France, right? So this is a place where people can secure loans and start, taking risk. I want to start a company. Go get a loan. You know that you have a guaranteed a rate on that loan. This is really progressive. It's meant to improve business. And again, it's not for the lowest of populations, and it's certainly not for the highest. This is for the middle class. This is a real step towards meritocracy. If people want to grow and take a chance and be successful in life, this is a vehicle for social elevation. Okay, step two, the Concordat of 1801, or what is sometimes known as the Concordat with Rome, or the Concordat of the papacy. Basically, Napoleon has a two-part goal. And again, he's devilishly smart, guys. Let's not be fooled here. He is not like some innocent saint of a man. But he wants to reconnect France with the papacy, right? Now, why does he have such a need to bring France back in line or back into communication with Rome, with the Catholic Church? One, he wants legitimacy. He wants to look like a legitimate ruler, and he needs Rome as a correspondent, as a connection, as someone that he does business with, because that will build legitimacy with other Catholic and Christian nations across Europe. Truthfully, there's also this other great propaganda point. He wants to look like a hero to the common people, right? The common people in France didn't want to see Catholicism taken away to begin with, right? They were mad about the civil constitution of the clergy, the confiscation of church lands, de-Christianization. All of those things had really lost a lot of the common people. Think of the Girondins. So this is a brilliant stroke by Napoleon to build popularism. He's putting all of the elements that had broken into factions during the French Revolution, and he's starting to knit them together in his French Empire. And so basically what the Concordat did is it named Catholicism not the official religion of France, but the religion of the majority. So like, yes, you don't control or tell us what to do, but you're in our hearts, right? We do accept Catholicism as the majority religion. The Pope, on the other hand, had to say that there was no going back. There was no time machine. They were never going to reclaim the lost church lands or stolen property, that kind of stuff. They just kind of had to live with where things were. It's a fresh start in 1801. Bishops could be selected by the Pope, but they had to be approved by the nation. So there's kind of that coming together. Eventually, the church renounces this. It doesn't give them enough freedom or autonomy, but it does what Napoleon needs. It shows that he cares. It shows that he's in it for the common man. All right, more reforms. All right, so the lycée system is not really full compulsory public education like we'll see later on in the 1800s in England, but it is a step towards a meritocracy and education again. And basically what this means, the lycée system, is students in grammar school who show a real aptitude, a real skill, either in mathematics like he did, in science, or in writing, or in the arts. They could then be given scholarships to continue their education at other academies throughout France, right? And so in essence, what he was trying to do was to give poor students or common people a way to access a free or a scholarship-based education. That's meritocracy, right? Common people, because of their skills, because of their merits, can rise, right? That they can grow to something better in society. That's so enlightened. That's so French Revolution. And so a very smart system, and it doesn't hurt him because, in essence, what he's doing is he's creating a vehicle for better political servants, right? I mean, these are people who can then enter into service for the nation. All right, so the next round of government and leaders can come from this. All right, last couple things that we'll look at. He creates the Legion of Honor in 1802, and basically this is a way of memorializing and celebrating France's military successes, its recent military success. So in the last 10 years, France really has a brilliant military track record. They've gone from being not good to saving the revolution. And so that will be celebrated and memorialized. He also creates the military campus in Paris, right? There's kind of the Seine River, and then we have the campus of Mars, basically, right? And so over there, he has his burial today. Napoleon is buried at what they call the Invalides, right? But it's a military college, and there's a military hospital, and then there's the military memorial. So it's the whole military center. It's the campus of Mars, just like in ancient Rome. You had the military training fields. And this is really good for propaganda and nationalism. He's celebrating the successes of the military. And let's be honest, at this point, something like 750,000 Frenchmen had served in the military. So this is, again, patting the French people on the back, saying, way to go, nice job. This is tremendous propaganda. All right, the last great accomplishment that we'll look at is perhaps his most celebrated, most epic of his reforms, and it is the Napoleonic Code of 1804. It is an absolutely critical event, and not just in French history, but in global history, certainly in European history, the Napoleonic Code. So what basically happened is Napoleon went to his fellow politicians and some of the most skilled attorneys of the day, and he had the law code consolidated. So he took all of the regional laws that existed throughout all the different provinces and regions of the French Empire and got rid of them and consolidated them into one body of law, one codicy of law, the Code of Napoleon. And what made it really truly revolutionary is it broke law into only 3 simple to understand kind of umbrella topics: your personal status, which meant, like your health, people can't fight you, kill you, like your basic health, that kind of stuff, your personal status. And that includes in political status, right? Like your voting rights and that kind of things. But then it had a whole separate body that was property, right? So when we think about theft or your house or insurances, all those kind of things would fit into property. And then lastly, the bottom one here is the acquisition of property. And that is, again, such a nod to the middle class, such a robust economic move to make for France, which again makes sense, to try to earn support of the middle class and stimulate the economy and make France into a true global power again. Acquisition of property focused on things like the right to your salary, right? If you're promised a wage, then you get that wage. If you're fired, you still get to collect wages for what you had. Severance pay, divorce pay, inheritance pay, right? Your access to those properties or capitals. This code is so meritocracy and is so middle class that it becomes kind of this beacon of what had been the French Revolution, of the ideas that all people have rights and you have equal rights in front of the law, right? Notice there's no noble version and no middle class version. It's one code of law. And so it's very progressive on top of it. Okay, so some artists' propaganda. But it is kind of amazing that I mentioned before, the French Revolution will be spread by the boots of his troops. And so as he continues to campaign into the Low Countries, right, they'll copy the Napoleonic Code in Belgium. It'll be heavily inspirational in the Netherlands. I think it's unfair to say that the states of the Rhineland were just majorly influenced. There really wouldn't be a Germany without Napoleon. So it's beyond influential. Poland will literally copy paste. It's a carbon copy. The Tanza map, the reform movement to the Ottoman Empire, inspired by it. Italy is for a while partially ruled by his brothers in the north, inspired by it. Napoleon takes over Spain, inspired by it. Portugal. All right, so you can get what I'm saying. At some point in the next 2 decades, most of Europe will rewrite their law codes to reflect the ideas of the Napoleonic Code. All right, so we're going to stop there. We won't go into the Haitian revolts or like his military campaigning. So this was Napoleon's early career, and I would say justification for why he should be celebrated, his brilliant political reforms. All right, guys, I gave you just a little piece of my love for Napoleon. Treat him well.